Admiral Mike Mullen is certainly a person that doesn't need a lot of introduction in this community, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. He's a 1968 graduate of the Naval Academy. He has commanded at every level of the Navy. He has spent time in the Pentagon in a variety of staff roles. And of course, you know him best in the last several roles that he played. He was the 32nd Vice Chief of Naval Operations in 2003 and 2004. He was the 28th Chief of Naval Operations. And of course, most recently was the 17th Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff from October of 2007 until just this past September when he retired from that role. So we're certainly delighted to have in this first day of the conference Admiral Mullen here to talk to us. I can't think of anybody who could give you a better perspective on what's going on in our military today. And so without further ado, Admiral Mike Mullen.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks to, no, you don't have to respond to that. I guess when you're retired, people don't respond like they used to. Thanks to Kent and AFCEA and Pete Daly and the Institute for putting this on. I know this is an incredibly well-run and long-standing affair, and I really appreciate the opportunity to spend a few minutes. I'd like to just pick up on one theme the chaplain mentioned when, during his prayer before we started eating, and that is to keep in mind those who are putting on packs right now and go on patrol. And yes, we're out of Iraq, but we still have close to 100,000 troops in Afghanistan. And even as they come down over the course of the next year or so, it's still going to be in the tens of thousands who are out there every single day risking their life so that we can be the country that we are. And so we just should keep them in mind and their families who have sacrificed so much over the course of the last decade. Next, I'd like to, and I won't take a lot of time doing this, but I want to ask all who are here who are veterans to please stand up and to say thanks. And I'll come back at the end of my comments, I'll come back and talk a little bit about veterans. And then I'd also like, and this is really why we're all here as far as I'm concerned, I'd like to have all those who are serving, obviously in any service, in uniform who are here and have you stand up so we can recognize you and say thanks. As was laid out in the introduction, I graduated in the 60s. So I'll try to frame this discussion, and I know the theme is military at the crossroads. And I don't know if I accept that, but I can certainly look back on the military sort of 10 years at a time. And where we were and what happened in the 60s was very tumultuous, certainly heading into and at the peak of Vietnam, and through the 70s as we left in the military at the end of the 70s, which was one that was, we transitioned to an all-volunteer force. To the 80s where we built it back up, to the 90s where we built it back down, and then to clearly the first decade of this century, which was a pretty dramatic decade. And so my thesis is over the next 10 years, there's going to be an awful lot that's going to happen. And that we will depend greatly on our men and women in uniform, the civilians who serve in our military, and there are many of you here today, and believe me, I'm grateful for that service, and our families, as we have over the course of the last 10 years. And if I were going to, I guess, emphasize the last 10 years, it would be one of surprise. Certainly 9/11 is the signature surprise, but when you talk about or look at the other things that happened in that decade, obviously 2 wars, a lot longer than we thought or anticipated early, a military which has changed dramatically. We look at things like Banda Aceh in 2004, Haiti recently, Katrina. You look at what happened recently in Japan, and you look at the financial crisis, the global financial crisis, which got us to where we are today. And so my expectation for the next 10 years, it's going to continue to be a pretty bumpy ride. And we're going to need a strong military to carry out the missions. Some of them might be known right now, but some of them clearly unknown, as it was in 2000. And so from that standpoint, as we look at a very, very difficult environment, and I really understand that, we need to do this, we need to make the changes that we're making very well. Strategically, where we are is, everybody says this, but we're much more globally integrated than I actually think we even understand we are, than we were before. We are much more responsive, and quite frankly, I think over the course of the last 10 years, we've adapted to change, a changing environment very, very well. Vern Clark, who most of you know, was a CNO at one time, and he used to talk about change as a way of life and challenging every assumption. And I think that is good wisdom, even for what we believe in, just to make sure that it's operative in the times that we find ourselves. We've also certainly had center stage as a country. Our values have been out there. And I think, as I look at our anchors, we need to stay with our values under all circumstances. And when we wander from that, we may solve short-term problems, but in the long term, it's going to hurt us as a country. And we need to stick with that, the freedom, the democracy, the individual rights, the fair treatment, the rule of law, all those things. And when we circumvent or appear to circumvent those, or when we have situations that get exposed like Abu Ghraib, or we get challenged and we look at where we are today, literally, in Guantanamo Bay, and what that does to us and where we are is something I think we have to pay a lot of attention to. So those values that are our anchors are key. And then our beliefs, and just to talk about a couple of them from my perspective. I just believe that economies drive outcomes. And I think if we can figure out a way to make our economy work with the Chinese economy, that the possibilities on the upside are enormous. But it's not just them, it's the five, it's Brazil, it's Europe, it's what's going to happen in the Middle East, all those things. I still believe that our national debt is our #1 security threat. And I've said that for some time, and people would ask, well, why would you say that? Actually, I'm enough of a budget guy, it's pretty simple. The worse our debt gets, the smaller our Pentagon budget's going to be, and the smaller our Pentagon budget is, the less likely we're going to be able to field the forces that we need in a comprehensive way to meet the needs that we have in this very fast changing world right now. I believe we need to figure out a way to take care of the State Department, to figure out a way to have diplomacy lead the military and not the other way around, and that we stand in very many ways for each other. I believe leaders at every level, but particularly the senior level, have to make some tough choices right now. And this is the military, and I'll speak to that, but it's also civilian leaders. Those choices are going to fall on us, and they won't be the ones we pick if we don't make them. Certainly believe trust is the coin of the realm, whether it's in a division, in a space, or whether it's between two nations. And we have plenty of nations that that trust is not there, so how do you develop that over time in a world that demands us? There are those that believe that our country's in decline. I think Bob Gates said it pretty well. You know, we've been put on that dustbin more than once. And it's not a place that I believe we are right now, but I think it is also important to know that people are asking the question. And that's a place, from my perspective, that we don't want to be as a country. I don't believe we are. I am worried about us in the military being connected to the American people. We come from less than 1% of the American people. We come from fewer and fewer places. We are more disconnected now than, in my view, and this is, I'm not hypothesizing this. I've been all over the country as chairman, talked to leaders in small cities, rural towns, as well as big cities, and they don't know enough about us and what we've been through and what our military represents, this all-volunteer force that is truly the best that the world has ever seen. I still believe, and I don't mean to disappoint this audience, I still believe our Army is the center of gravity in our military. And if we get it right for the Army, we are going to head fair. And if we don't, no matter what we do in the other services, it's going to be a difficult pull. And I believe more than ever in diversity of our force, and that we have to actively pursue it in the world in which we live to make us stronger. Lots of challenges out there strategically. I don't think, you know, this is a group that understands that. But it's not just the military challenges. It's the whole issue of energy. We can't go fast enough in all our services, using less and figuring out a way to get to renewable sources and get to less dependent on energy than we are right now. And I went through a couple of the booths that were tied to power generation, much lower power. At least I took it from two of the small vendors that were out there. Water's going to be a big issue in the not too distant future. The whole issue of haves and have-nots. You know, I still, going back to the economies, parents want to raise their kids to a higher standard of living. And where it continues to be pulled apart, I think it is just a precursor to very, very bad outcomes in various parts of the world. Clearly, the whole issue of cyber, which I would hope would dominate this conference. I mean, I believe that cyber is an existential threat to our country. It's not just growing, it's not just out there, it's not a nuisance. We don't have many existential threats anymore. I believe that is one, and that line leaders need to figure this out. It's not up to those that we always depended on, the system administrator, the IT expert, the commo, you pick it, to figure it out. It's up to us to understand it and to guide it as leaders, or it will eat us up in ways that we don't understand. And I know, I understand our capabilities quite well, and quite frankly, I just assume that the enemy is as good as we are. Certainly the issues of North Korea, Iran, many of you know how many times, or I went to Pakistan a lot, and those challenges will continue to be out there. I'll talk a few minutes about our military over the last 10 years. Joint, now I was technically joint when I became chairman. As I've told many people, I had never been on the joint staff. You know, it's nice to come in as chairman if you got to come into the joint staff. But I thought I was joint, not really. And this is to individual services. Services are still very service-centric. And they always will be to some degree, but you have to fight to look at the joint solutions. And that is that much more the case in a much tighter budget environment, and I'll talk about that. This is the best force we've ever had. 2 wars, all-volunteer force, 1%. It's a force that if you know it, the major units have deployed 4 and 5 times. That's sort of brigade-level units. Marine battalions have deployed that many times with less than, typically On the Army side, 12 to 15-month deployments. On the Marine Corps, 7 at a time. And it is a force that has adapted and changed and, quite frankly, is transformed. And in 2000 or 2001, you may remember that was something that the President talked about, the Secretary of Defense talked about, lots of people. We didn't understand what it meant. Well, we have done that in many ways. And I would argue over the next 10 years, we're going to have to do it again. And if we sit on our laurels, we're going to get knocked right on our cans. It is a tired force. It is a tired force. And the focus gets put on the Army and the Marine Corps, and I understand that. But when you pull the string on deployment lengths and rotations and numbers in the Navy and the Air Force, it exceeds what we were doing in 2000, 2001. And we're wearing out new systems fast. We're wearing out our people fast. And we need to be mindful of that as we look to the future. We need to rebalance. We're out of balance. Heavy focus on CT and coin, and I understand that. But the future world, that's not what it's going to be in its entirety. And we really need to look at, are we ready? My own view is I thought I was ready in 2000, 2001 after the 90s, and I wasn't ready. Not in the Navy, not in where I was actually a warfare commander in ways that I look back on now over the last 10 years, that we need to be ready and sustain that readiness. And that takes training, that takes education, that takes time at sea, time in the air, time on the ground. It takes joint exercises, and it takes extracting as much out of those as we possibly can. We get a lot of credit, and we should, for killing bin Laden. And many people looked at that, obviously, as sort of a singular moment. My perspective on that was an evolution of where we were in the late 70s, 30 years later. So yes, it gets focused on JSOC and special ops, et cetera, but it was much more important than that, because that event, that execution, that level of excellence, which I have seen all over our military in the last 4 years, represented 30 years of work, 30 years from Desert One. And we need to, again, not rest and say, gee, it went well, we're okay. We're not. So what does it mean to be ready for the next 10 years? And I don't have the answers to that, except we can't sit back because the world's not going to sit back. We didn't understand what the speed of war was in 2001 or so. We do now. We can match the enemy. We can actually be ahead of the enemy. And in great part, it's because of the kinds of systems that have evolved over time that I see here. But that's the key. Can I match? Can I actually stay ahead in the speed of war and in the speed of knowledge? Not information. I don't care about information. Not data. I don't care about data. But as a decision maker, can I get the knowledge to the decision maker at the right time in the right place? You know, from the small unit leader of 4 troops in the field to the commanders of divisions or battle groups or whatever, can I get it to them on time? And that's a question that still is out there. Clearly, we've moved to the unmanned world. I'm never one that believe we're going unmanned all the way, but there is more and more of it. And I saw, a high-level robot this morning demonstrated, and have spent more than my fair share of time in the how do you get at IEDs without exposing people. And my immediate reaction was, it's sensors. It is not platforms. It's sensors. And how do I process the data? You got to have platforms. We're further down that road than we used to be, but we're still, I think, too platform-centric. I still believe, and this is key, our military is composed of leaders. They matter, command matters, structure matters. We dismantled the structure in the Army above a brigade, dismantled it, deployed the brigade without their bosses, and deployed divisions without their brigades. And it is part of us. We need to be together as much as we can. And that's clearly a lesson that we've learned. It is about systems. It's not just sensors, it's not just data, but about systems. Where does it fit in? How does whatever you're building here for the future fit into the system to make it better and, quite frankly, take the cost out of it? It is about collaboration. Our military is about that now. And it is about developing a cost culture, which we didn't have over the last 10 years, that we moved away from, that we have to move back to, because every single dollar matters. It's about listening. Our military now is about listening to other people, about understanding problems from someone else's perspective. You know, we were blessed in the earthquake in Haiti because Ken Keane, who was the deputy three-star Army general, he's the deputy in Southcom at the time, and he happens to be in Haiti the day of the earthquake. But not only that, is he happened to have gone to school with the one-star who was the Brazilian commander in Haiti at the time, and Ken went to war college in Brazil. It wasn't just go to NDU, it was we went to school in their home. And we need to pursue that from a joint and combined perspective in ways that we haven't in the past. And we need to understand what a military-to-military relationship means. What does that mean? Not just what it's always been, not just come here and train, not just go to Leavenworth or go to Newport. What does it mean when the chips are down? Who do we know? How do we leverage that over the course of new military relationships and relationships that we've had for a long time? And what does it mean for the next 10 years? And then lastly, and I'm in the sort of our military standpoint, but the budget. And I know it's on everybody's mind. One of the first, I sat down with some of the sailors of the year, and one of the first questions is, are we going to get the 15-year retirement? And my expectation answering that question is no. But I also have answered this many years now, is we don't have an infinite amount of money. And people take up 60 to 70% of our budget. So we're going to have to figure out how to get it right. And I'll come back to that in just a second. I'm delighted we have a strategy for our budget. That has not always been the case. And I've been around long enough to know that every strategy gets shredded on both sides. That's okay. But it sends the strategic vectors, which I think we all need to listen to. This budget crunch is a long time coming. Those of you that know me, I was working this in 2003. So the train, which has been underway, has shown up. Now, I got to admit, it's a little bigger train than I expected with the financial crisis, so it's a little more intense. But we should be ready for this in ways that we hadn't as it shows up. I think it's manageable. I think we leaders have to focus on where we're going to take risk and what does that mean, and it doesn't just take the money out or put the money in. What is risk? Many of us deal with that in the field and at sea, but what is it in terms of our overall strategic bets with respect to money? We need to get the Marine Corps back to sea, and this is part of it, and we need to, they're our joint partner. They've actually been our joint partner for a long, throughout history. We also need to extract as much as we can from this air-sea battle with the Air Force. That was not something, we didn't work together before, except if we had to. Now, because we've been fighting together for so long, we are, and the leaders are together, and we need to stay together. If I'm going to bet on the future in a money environment, the place I'm going to put my bet is on our people. And I think we need to keep that in mind. And as we look at the future, who are our best combat leaders? If you want, from a standpoint of, are we going to be okay through all this? If we pick the right people, if we have the right leaders, if we don't lose those who sacrificed so much and their lessons, and these are the young captains and majors and lieutenants and lieutenant commanders, that we don't just want to hit the retention numbers. I want the right people, and quite frankly, in every service it's the same. The only people that know who the right people are the chiefs and the COs, the 05 COs. So it's battalion commanders, it's ship COs, it's squadron commanders. And we need to tap that to make sure we actually are keeping the right people, not that we're just hitting the numbers. We need to focus on our families. I didn't see the family spouse education, PTS, medical booth out here. Now, it might be out here, but we need to make sure that we reach out to our families in every single thing that we do. They have sacrificed enormously. If you're a brigade commander or you're in a brigade, you maybe went through 5 deployments. If you're a special operator, there are special operators that have deployed 20 and 30 times. We have asked our families to do the impossible. If I'm a 5-year-old kid when this war starts, and 10 years have passed, I'm now 15, my whole conscious life has been at war in my family. That's never happened before. So we need to reach to them to make sure they are well taken care of. As we look to the future and we slow down a bit, back to keeping the combat leaders, how do we keep those that were in that the adrenaline was rushing because of the fight? As we come off of that, we need a rest. We need a break. How do you generate that kind of enthusiasm for what you're doing in a training environment? That is a huge challenge for us as a force. We have been unbelievably resilient, quite frankly, given the sacrifices. And I talked about the 1% piece, and I asked vets to stand up. We have a system, it's been in the country for a couple hundred years, where you join the military and you stay until you're ETS or EAS or EAOS, and we say thank you very much. When you make a decision to leave, we then put you in the non-retention queue, and we focus on the retention queue. And so we say the day, I call it the duffel bag syndrome. So the day you're due to leave, you come, salute the flag, and we say thank you very much, have a nice life. We turn you over to the VA, another part of our stovepipe system. The VA engages you with some of your needs, some of the benefits, et cetera, and education is one now. And then the VA says, thank you very much, have a nice life. And we return you to communities throughout the country where our homeless rate actually exceeds that of what happened in Vietnam, where our female homeless rate actually exceeds the rate of the male homeless rate, and the women are showing up with the kids, where veterans are coming home, or there are military personnel leaving to an unemployment rate that is double the size typically of what it is in any given state and throughout the country. These are unbelievably capable people, and we have got to figure out a way to help them bridge in education, in health, and in employment. And if we do that, they'll take off. They're the best, certainly I've ever seen. They will lead this country for generations. But it's not going to happen by just standing back. And there are programs. The Marine Corps has got a good program now called Marine for Life. Navy's got Safe Harbor. How do we stay in touch to make sure they're okay? And for their sacrifice, and for the sacrifice of the families of the fallen, that we repay that debt, which is a debt actually that cannot be repaid. How do we do that for this force which has been so extraordinary? The wounds of these wars, the TBI, the brain wounds, which, to my surprise, we don't know much about the brain. And it's the mild TBI, which is such a vexing problem for us. And that combined with PTS, which has always been around, and yet we haven't solved that. We've got record suicide rates in the military. And our goal for suicide needs to be 0, not just stopping them. It needs to be 0 so that our behavior on how we intercept that problem fundamentally changes. There was a column that Tom Brokaw wrote roughly a year or so ago, talked about a spouse of an Army soldier who basically, when he deployed, she kept the shutters closed. And she never wanted to look out there to see if the chaplain and the Keiko were coming in. This is the kind of stress that I have seen, and more specifically my wife Deborah has seen. Kids with PTS symptoms, spouses with PTS symptoms. So we have to reach out, not just let them float away and see what happens. There is, and I believe this, there is what I call this sea of goodwill that's out in the country. I believe that every community in the country will take care of their vets. They'll figure out a way to do it. If we can figure out how to connect, to match the resources and the leadership that's available locally, customized for the community, to those, in fact, who are coming home after this extraordinary time, to make a difference, to ensure that we take advantage of that potential. And there's an upside, and there will be some challenges, but if we give them a little boost, they'll make a difference for a long, long time to come. These are the same sailors, soldiers, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guard that on Thursday of the day before they left the service, I would have stood in front of a bullet for them. And on Friday, boom, they're gone. I'm back inwardly focused in our command. And I think we can be better than that, and we have to be better than that. So again, thanks for all you do. Thanks for those of you who are serving. And you've made a huge difference in what has been an enormously challenging, stressful, dramatic decade. I think the next one will be equally. Thank you. Okay, I'm happy to take questions. I'm told the rules are go to a microphone and get in line. If I know you, I won't call on you.
Admiral Lynn Wells from NDU.
I know you, Lynn.
Okay. So you talked about the state defense rebalancing. We've been through the QDDR, we've been through the QDR, we've been through the QHSR. How much progress is really being made below the leadership level? I mean, the Secretary talked well, Secretary Clinton talks well. I get the sense that the implementation at lower levels of this whole of government isn't going as well as we might like.
Well, I mean, the QDDR, which is the Secretary of State's, I think, great effort to try to structure who we are and where we're going with respect to the State Department, which has never been done before, was a tremendously important step. And I mean, when you just think about us and our bureaucracy in the Pentagon, if you can imagine the first QDR and what was going on the deck plates, it just takes a while. But Secretary Clinton has put in place some things, specifically I'm aware of. The Foreign Policy Board would be an example. I mean, they've got an implementation plan, which I have seen to some degree in execution, and it's the first year. So I think the important part of it is that not only that it was put in place, but that it is sustained over time. And I believe the days of, and this may not happen, I believe the days of the State Department and the Defense Department, and there are a lot of other agencies, fighting each other are over. The world, we can't address the world unless we address it together. So I applaud the effort. They're making progress, and I know the Pentagon's working hard to work with them. That it would not be, completely copacetic in the trenches yet, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
Lance Leventhal with the ATCA newsletter. I'm glad to see that the Navy has recognized its most powerful and most persistent enemy, but putting the Congress aside, something obviously in $500 billion has got to be cut. Personnel, hardware, bases, missions. What do you see as what are we going to cut?
Well, I think actually the budget, which will roll out here in sometime in the next 2 or 3 weeks, I think you all know the State of the Union is tonight, will identify the specifics. I have said for some time, and I still believe this, and I think the number, and Admiral Gortney can correct me, I think the number is $487 billion in this budget, which is the fiscal year 13 and 5-year budget. I think it is hard but manageable, and we've spent the better part of the last year essentially understanding that was coming and working towards that number. What I am very concerned about is what I would call the next $500 billion. And I think the next $500 billion, or $487 billion, has a good chance of breaking us. And everybody makes predictions. It's just I've worked in that world for a long time, and I fundamentally believe we're going to have to change dramatically if there's another one another budget of that magnitude. to meet the challenges that are out there. And clearly some of what we'd have to change is what we're doing. And how we're doing it, and what we're developing, and how long it's going to take, all those things. So I think we can do it, and the specifics will obviously be laid out here in the budget very shortly. Yeah.
Admiral Mullen, Ron Kalunga, Alenia, North America. With the signing of the 2012 budget for the Defense Department, we had an addition to the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the National Guard. Could you give us your views? I know in years past that was something that you were not in favor of. So could you give us your views now that it has happened, and what you expect in the future?
Well, now that it's a law, I'm in favor of it. I mean, I know I'm not wearing a uniform anymore, but that's sort of the way it works. You know, when a law passes, we march off, no matter how we felt about it beforehand. I have had, as chairman, I've had the Craig McKinley, who is the 4-star that we worked to get promoted to 4 stars, and head of the National Guard Bureau. He's been in the tank for virtually every meeting we've had. And so he's been able to participate. And the Guard, we would not be where we are today without a transformed Guard and Reserve. They have been incredible in all the services, but particularly, obviously, with the scale and scope in the Army and in the Air Force. So they have been tremendously supportive. Now that the law has changed, having had the head of the National Guard Bureau in the tank for the last 4 years, this is something we can work with, and I honestly I don't believe it's going to be a problem.
Deanna Polk, Emergency Preparedness Coordinator for the Council of Community Clinics. I want to thank you, sir, and as a civilian veteran of the USNS Mercy, a couple of their missions, I know this is a long shot, but are there any thinking along the lines of, when you were talking about dealing with China, that possibly in the future that there may be a collaborative effort with the, I heard they built a new hospital ship. I was just wondering if there's been any thought to exploring that possibility.
I actually think, and I was in China last July with my counterpart, and as we talk about reconnecting mill to mill, and this is part of what I was talking about when I said, what is a military to military relationship? What are we strategically trying to achieve with you pick the country or you pick the region? And the areas that we go back to work, we are proposing to work with the Chinese in something like this are search and rescue, certainly medical stuff, et cetera. So in many ways, you start small and you start slow, but I would certainly see as part of the execution down the road that possibility. They built that. They didn't build that ship because they just pulled it out of the air. They watched what's happened with us in the last several years, over the last 10 years, certainly, and the impact that they've had. And I will tell you, in Haiti, one of the things that I stood back and watched is the first search and rescue team, 33 hours later, was from Beijing and on the ground. So I think they understand that. That's why they built the ship. And I would hope we could get to a point where the two militaries, and certainly the two countries, the two militaries are working together to help solve these incredible challenges that are out there.
Thank you.
I think I can take one more.
We have time for one last question.
David Austin, Time Warner Business Services, and I'm a retired Marine. I just wanted to say thanks for addressing the statistics issue regarding the military when they separate. I almost became one of the statistics in 2008 and almost lost my house. And after 22 years of service, it was really difficult to track down resources to help my family to, and eventually Time Warner had a program, Honor a Hero, Hire a Vet program where they support the military. And that's where I'm at now. But I'm wondering if you know if there's anything in place that's going to help the Marine, soldier, airman, sailor separate from the military and set them up with the programs they need and the benefits and the resources they need when they separate, so they're not going to fail.
Boy, great question. But it also reminds me of, all of the employers who are here, and I'm not, so you can ignore this, but, were I in a position, I certainly would want to know how many vets you've hired. Because they're, as I said earlier, they're great people, and many of you are, and I know that. But I would argue that whatever your number is, double or triple it. Your outreach, it's got to be a good skill set that matches. I understand all that. But they're there, and they will make I believe they will make a huge difference. True for those who are physically wounded as well. Many of you have done that. Actually, not surprising to me, since I've been in so many hospital rooms, and you go to a hospital room to try to generate, comfort for them, and you actually come out of a hospital room where they've comforted me and my wife and inspired us. And I've seen companies hire wounded that learned a whole lot more about life once that they had, somebody who'd been and sacrificed so much and was so inspirational, and you picked the area. When there was 2 years ago, there was a study that DOD did with there was an Army one-star whose name escapes me right now, doctor, with a civilian, on the civilian side, not government side, but a civilian who did a study on suicide and suicide prevention. And we found that in the Department of Defense, we had 900 programs. So that's a function. 1, we have money. 2, somebody has a good idea. 3, let's try this. But what we didn't know was we start programs, we didn't know whether they were working well or not. So it is critically important that we actually have metrics, have returns on programs where we're investing, and invest in the good ones and let the other ones go, kill them, including family programs. And there will be, DOD has taken a hard look at family programs, specifically in this budget that is about to be rolled out, with some of that in mind. I didn't see, and I'm actually very serious, I didn't see the hire a vet booth out here. And at a convention like this, it ought to be there. And I mean, as good as these sailors are and Marines are, they're not all staying in. That's just reality. And so I feel that we have an obligation across the ETS, not just the Have a Nice Life stovepipe system that we have. And if we invest up front, actually they'll go home and they'll become our recruiters, which is an important part as well. That can become part of the system. So I think leaders have to look at this constantly, and it's line leaders that have to do this. There are an awful lot of programs specifically with respect to that, but what I worry about is commands don't spend enough time on it. The Navy, we turn it over to the career counselor. I mean, commanders need to do this. And when commanders do something, actually something happens. Okay? Thanks again.